Hello and welcome to the DockYard Elixir Roundtable. I'm Nathan Long, and what am I here now? I'm a staff software engineer at DockYard. That's right.
And my name is Mike Benz. I'm a staff software engineer here at DockYard also.
My name is Andrew Berrien. I'm an Elixir engineer here at DockYard.
My name is Adam Phillips, and I am an engineering manager here at DockYard.
My name is Brooklin Myers. I am an Elixir educator here at DockYard, and I suppose DockYard Academy.
My name is Gustavo, and I am a senior software engineer here at DockYard.
Yeah, so Brooklyn's title is different, and we're going to get to what that's all about pretty soon. But before we do, I want to let Mike Benz spend some time talking about a new project that he's created, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so hopefully by the time this airs, the blog post will be out on this. But if you saw my talk at ElixirConf 2021, we wrapped up a project with Phillips as far as their live streaming platform, rewriting that in Elixir. And the big concern there was that the original version of it was dealing with performance issues, and so we wanted to make sure that the new Elixir version was up to par. So we did a number of different benchmarks and analysis of their platform. And one of the things that we did was we used a flame graph library. And so we identified a number of issues or a number of things that we could improve based on the results from those flame graphs. And so starting, I put together a blog post on that and how we did it in the process. And in as we were starting to wrap up that blog post, realized, well, what if we took that flame graph and integrated that into live dashboard, so you could easily plug in a page to the live dashboard and then profile a function call and get a flame graph right in the dashboard. So that the blog post went on hold for a week or two, and we worked through building that dashboard page, and then rewrote the blog post kind of around that. So, like I said, that'll be out hopefully by the time this roundtable airs. You should be able to read about that. But yeah, basically you jump into live dashboard, you give it a module functionality that you want to profile. Click so the library is named Flame On, obviously after the keeping with the Marvel theme for Human Torch. So you put the module functionality in, click Flame On, and then you trigger that function however you would trigger it, and the dashboard page will then update with the flame graph of that call. So the kind of the most natural one is going to be a flame graph of a web request, right? Because that's most of your stuff is going to be, especially if you're running live dashboard, you're most likely a web app. And so by default, it will profile the cowboy handler execute function, which is kind of the top level for almost any of the Phoenix live view or dead view controller calls. And so you run that, and it'll show you a flame chart of where the time is being spent in the plug, and then in the actual request, any database calls, anything like that, and allow you to really see what, if you have if you have an issue with something being slow, it'll tell you exactly where it is. And even if you don't, it'll help you point out some ways to improve. So before you get that wall of traffic, so you've got that. So you've got that, ready to go. One of the things we found in the Phillips project was that on the page we're displaying the time and date of the events, right? So we had a bunch of different tiles on the screen. You can check out Phillips.com. You can see what it is, but there's a little date in there, and in order to make sure that it showed up in the right time and date for the user that's logged in, we needed to, obviously run it through time zone calculations, and we were using TZ data for those as the time zone database, and that was kind of lagging behind. It was pretty slow. So ran some benchmarks with Benchy and compared TZ data with the TZ library, and it was something like 12 times faster. And so we swapped that out and got an immediate speed improvement. Again, so the flame graph showed us that that's where the time was being spent, and then Benchy told us that TZ was better than TZ data, dropped it in, and got a performance win there. So yeah, so once that's out and available, I'd love to hear feedback on how it's been helping out. You know, I'm hoping to see a bunch of screenshots in Twitter of flame graphs and stuff like that. So looking for feedback.
I think this is really great just because your project is making this flame graph like generation much more accessible, and just, you know, it's very quick to go from a question to an answer without having to go through a big process. And I liked in the blog post that you wrote that you were showing, like, if a function calls, you've got like a top level function and it calls A and it also calls B, you can see in the flame graph maybe 90% of the time in the top level function is spent in B. So there's no point in trying to optimize A, right? That's at best, it's gonna, you know, remove 10% of the time. So spend all your effort on B, and just giving you that quick visual, like, oh, that's where all my time is spent. Boom, go work on that part. That's really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And that, you know, because we had our thoughts on, you know, where we might see things that were slow, and even, you know, like the time zone database stuff was cool, but the other thing we found was there was a section where there was a search bar, and when you click the search bar, it drops down and there's some suggested items already. Well, those were all rendering on the initial load of the page, and 99% of the time you're not actually clicking that search bar. So I think it was using Alpine it was always rendering it, and then using Alpine to hide and to show and hide. So we looked at it, and it was like doubling the time of the request. So we just jumped in, swapped that from a Alpine, you know, always render it to render on when you click the search button. The drop down then renders it using live view, and that just saved a whole bunch of time on basically every page, because the search bar is everywhere. So, but that wouldn't have the fact that it was being rendered server side all the time and then client side shown and hidden would have been missed, and we would have been spending all that extra time, you know, during the wall of traffic, working on stuff that 99% of the users aren't going to actually even see. So
I'm curious about what the flow would be for triggering these graphs. So essentially, if I'm understanding you correctly, you wrap this flame on call somewhere in your code base, you walk through, and then you reproduce whatever would trigger that. Or maybe you could also, if you're running it with the IEX-S, you could just call it manually. Is this something that you could like trigger in a test, or like what are some flows for kind of displaying these graphs easily?
Yeah, well, so the flow is really, at least for Flame On, the flow is you open up the live dashboard, you click the Flame On tab, you tell it what function of profile, and you click Flame On, and then, you know, you in another tab you refresh the page, or, you know, whatever it is, and then when you jump back to the other tab, once that request is completed, it takes a second, and then it shows you the flame graph right inside the dashboard. So there's not, you don't have to jump back into anything. You know, all my testing's been, you know, I got two tabs open. It's the dashboard. I click Flame On, swap over to the tab, refresh, swap back, wait a second, it shows up, and then, you know, then that. If you're doing stuff from, so the underlying this is the eFlambe library, which the way that works is a command line, and this is then how we did it for Veeps, was this command line interface where in IEX you run the eFlambe command to capture a specific function, and then you trigger that function, and then it generates a file which can then be uploaded to a website called SpeedScope. And so, but what we're doing is we're triggering that through the dashboard. We're triggering that, creating the file, and then we're parsing the file, and then using that file to display the results in live view. So So there is a CLI way to do this, and that CLI way is actually what we did originally with Veeps, which is and if you check out the eFlambe project, there's instructions on how to do that. It's a really simple. We thought we can take it to the next level and throw it in the dashboard, so you don't have to mess around. It's available to the server without having to be on the command line.
Are there any like cautions or caveats for using this in production? Like you gave the example of you want to profile this and you go reload the page, but what if 1,000 people load that page in that time? Is that
right? So the caution or caveat that I put in it is don't do it in production. Don't do it. So don't do it in a critical production scenario. So eFlambe uses mech to swap out. So it actually swaps out the Cowboy Handler module for a different one. It's its own version of it that adds the trace, and then it runs through the call. And when it's done, it swaps it back. And so if you're dealing with a critical path or a real production system that can't have issues, I would say don't do that, or run it on a separate node. And only use that, only run it against that node, and don't have your production traffic going against it. What we found, what we were actually looking at was, we were thinking, or at least with Veeps, when we were looking at it, we were thinking, well, we got to throw a whole bunch of load at the system and then run a flame graph to see where it's slowing down. And what we actually ended up with was that we got as much information about where the potential issues are on a system that's not under load as all the fixes that we figured out, we found in a system that wasn't under load anyway. So yes, there are going to be issues that show up when the system is under load, and so we were running Locust Swarm to hammer the system. But a lot of the stuff shows up even if you're not under load, because what we actually found out was happening when the system was under incredible load, and you run a flame graph, you see a lot of the flame graph is actually time spent sleeping, and that's because the process doesn't have priority and has to. And so, but that sleep isn't helpful, because you can't do anything about that. That's simply the fact that the system that process isn't scheduled. And so, looking at a system not under load is actually, we found to be more useful, because you don't have those extra sleeps in there that are just that you have to then ignore and say, oh, well, that's not that. So
you can use this in dev and find most of the issues that you're going to find.
Yeah. And like I said, so if you did want to test it under load and see what would happen, I would have a separate node that isn't production, and run a Locust Swarm or something against that to generate the load against that, and don't drop this in and run it in your production environment, because it's swapping the beam files out. That's obviously it's not something you want happening on critical production systems.
So my thought is, how flexible is that display code that's currently displaying it in the Phoenix dashboard? Because the first place my brain goes to this is like, how can I do it in Livebook? So if we could trigger that from Livebook, display that same view. Are there any thoughts about doing that? Or
yeah. So actually, the Flameon it's a live view component with a dashboard page wrapper. So you should be able to take that component and drop it into your live view, any live view page, and it should be self-contained enough to just run and just work wherever you wanted to put it. So if you're not running live dashboard, but you've got a Phoenix app, and you have an admin console and you want to be able to do this, again, I would caution against doing it in production. But if you wanted to do that, you can drop it in your own. Now, as far as taking that live component and dropping it in Livebook, I'm not familiar enough with Livebook to know if that's possible or how you would do that. But all that to say, it's a standard live component that you can use, or you can use the dashboard page wrapper and drop it in dashboard. So it's if you want to add Flamon to your system that is already running live dashboard, it's 2 lines of code. It's the add the dependency and add the entry to the router for live dashboard.
I had a bit of a question about, because you mentioned it can help you get insight into how your code is running, what pieces of it might be taking more time. Is there anything that it can do or already does beyond the graph itself that could maybe help you get some insight in there? Like, are there any interesting stats as part of it, or things that it can do for you, or yeah?
I mean, it's a visualization tool, so it can, beyond telling you that this function call is taking a long time, or this this and the children of this function call are taking a long time, telling you where to focus. I mean, that's really the primary goal is where's the time being spent. And it does have zooming, so like, if you're like, you've got a section where you're like, I know they can't do anything about this, but this section here, you can click on that block, and then it will zoom to that block and then show you the relative time of the children of that block. So if your plug's taking a long time, your actual render's fine, but your plug's taking a long time, you click on the plug call, and then you can dig into that and say, okay, where do I look here for optimizations, that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's really just it's a layer on top of eFlambe that gives you visualization inside Live Dashboard.
That's really awesome, and I'm glad you worked on that to make that that tool, that kind of visualization available and like much more accessible to people in the Elixir world. So hopefully we'll see a lot more usage of that coming up soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's talk a little bit about the DockYard Academy. Brooklin, you have been laboring away very diligently at creating out content for that. Just some things I wanted to say. Like, I've been really impressed with what you've done so far. I was thinking, I'm a programmer who likes to explain things, but you're doing way more than just being a programmer who explains things. Like, you've got this whole teaching methodology and like this conceptual framework for how to teach stuff to students and get them to practice them and collaborate. So I'm really impressed with that. And also bravo for being brave enough to come on the show and talk about something that's still a work in progress. That's pretty cool. I was looking through, you were showing me some of the stuff that you've got in the works right now. And you've got like an outline of like getting started, stuff like setting up your dev environment, fundamentals, which is, I think that pretty much corresponds to the live book, right? Of like going through teaching basics of Elixir. And then you move on to like project development, Phoenix project development, and OTP. So what, I guess that gives kind of a sense of it, but what's the starting point that you have in mind for students coming in, and what's the ending point that you hope to get them to in this program?
That's a great question. So the starting point that I'm trying to design for, and this is true pretty much whenever I'm creating content or any sort of educational material, is I try to make zero assumptions. I try to start from absolute scratch and build the concepts up as necessary, rather than assuming some sort of prior programming background or assuming that they already have Elixir experience or they already know how memory works. And so I follow this principle called Scaffolded Design, which is essentially that whenever you explain something, you need to ensure that all the terms you're using, everything that you're using as part of that explanation, has already been explained. And so if you're going to talk about something, you need to talk about all the components of it first. And then within that, it's also coming from, you have to think ahead to where you want them to go. So often a lesson will start with this kind of what's called backwards design, which is, okay, what am I trying to get them to learn? What do I want them to be able to do? And then you work your way backwards, figuring out, okay, what steps do I need to get them to go through until you get all the way to zero, and you ensure that there's no like sudden jumps. Now, as for where I'm hoping that the students get to, I have two visualizations in my head. I kind of have the MVP student, the, you have learned what is necessary to graduate from the program, to say that you understand the material. You're kind of the baseline student, and anything below that, you need to learn more. And then there's the exceptional student. So the exceptional student has gone above and beyond. They have learned all of the concepts inside and out. They have the ability to work with the tools at a very intermediate level. And so the baseline student, my expectation is, because I'm trying to come from an industry background, right? I don't just want to teach people theory. I don't just want to teach them, oh, well, here's the tools. I want people to be able to do things and to be able to go into companies and be productive members of those teams. So one of the first things I did when I started creating content was polling different companies about what they want and what they need. And most of the things that I would hear is they need people who can problem solve, the people who, it's less about knowing specific information about Elixir and having specific knowledge, and more about having a problem-solving mindset, being able to figure things out, being able to learn, and figuring out how to incorporate that in teaching material has been really, really fun and really, really interesting, and kind of taking a bit of a different approach than, well, okay, here's the tool, here's the basics, here's the data types, here's the operators, and going beyond into here's some of the philosophy that you should take. Here's how you can break down problems. Here's how you can figure out the solutions to problems that you don't understand. And so that's kind of my baseline student. A baseline student might not have come away with every single concept that we've hoped to teach, but they will be good problem solvers and understand, have enough tools in their tool belt that they're able to go into the industry, effectively solve problems, and pick up what it is that they either weren't introduced to or didn't pick up at the time. And that exceptional student is more knowledge-based. They have that same fundamental problem-solving skill set, but they also have targeted knowledge of OTP. They are proficient building Phoenix, both dead view and live view applications, and they've been introduced to kind of the core fundamental Elixir concepts. More than introduced, they're capable of, they've used, they have worked with, and they're proficient with them.
Cool. You showed me a live book that you have that is going through sort of the fundamentals of Elixir material, and starting from data types and going up through different kinds of logic, and you'll explain a concept in just prose, right? You're like, here's what Boolean comparison is all about, and then now here's a spot for you in the live book to type in something so that you can compare these things and see that you understand what happens when you do false and true or something. And then you just build up to more complex stuff. Like at one point you have the students implement paper, rock, scissors with just Boolean logic in the functions, because they haven't seen if or cond or case or whatever yet. And then later on you have them come back and say, all right, now that you know about pattern matching and multiple function heads, now re-implement paper, rock, scissors using those tools. So I really like that approach, and I like the way that Livebook enables you to have an interactive tutorial. It's like you're not just reading a blog post. Now there's a place in the middle of the blog post to type in something and see what happens. And that's really a neat usage of Livebook.
It's been very interesting to see how, because I've gotten some people to run through it at this point, and what I often notice is they'll run through the material, and then I'll ask them, okay, did that make sense? And they'll say, yeah, totally got it. And then they get to the your turn section, and it asks them to do something that is like one-to-one related with what they just read. It's meant to be, if you understood it, you can do this. And the number of times they get that like, oh, look on their face and then scroll back up. It's yeah, so having that little, hey, prove that you actually understood this at the time. Recall is fundamental to kind of meta learning. I'm not a meta learning expert, but I do know that it's incredibly important to look back and remember what it is that you are actually trying to pick up. And so that is one of the purposes of those section, as well as proving that they actually did understand it, absorb it, read it. I think everyone here and probably everyone listening can relate with skimming, where we often skim through material and we go, oh yeah, I pretty much got that, but being forced to actually prove that you understood it. And if you are, the nice thing is that if you're a student who is coming from a stronger background and you do have some of those fundamentals already, that's no problem. You can probably blaze through some of the material, complete those your turns, and it's very easy, I think, to think that you understand something as well. So if you think, well, I already have this knowledge, so I'm just going to blaze through it, but then you get to a your turn and it actually throws you, and you're like, oh, I don't understand what this means, I don't get it. That can also force you to question what you already understand, rather.
So you have a podcast called Elixir Newbie. I don't know if you're still running it. I glanced at it, but you have an episode on, like, I think it's called How to Solve Any Problem, and you're just talking about the general process of, you start with something that you don't know how to solve and you break it down into things that you do know how to solve. I think you gave the example of, like, you're trying to render something complicated on a web page and you don't know how to do that yet, but just render hello world and get that. Like, oh, that works. Okay, now what? Now I can make it slightly closer to my goal. And I think that sort of problem solving skill is what you're talking about. Like, you want people to come away with, I don't know how to do this, but I can figure it out in small steps. And I like, one of the sections that I read that you wrote was about enumerating on non-enumerables. Like, you want to take a string and break it into characters so that you can enumerate over those characters. And like, you talked about how you want to be able to break down problems into parts you can solve. And so maybe, like, a good example of that would be, you want to count how many times the letter E is in a string, and the string module doesn't give you anything for doing that, but you know how to count elements in a list. So turn the string into a list, and now you have a problem you know how to solve. So I really like that you're teaching that kind of break it down into steps. And also, I'd love for you to talk some more about some of the like, besides paper rock scissors, some of the other exercises and things that you came up with, because I think you have a lot of fun examples.
Absolutely. I'll definitely jump into the exercises. I do want to talk about what you just mentioned there, which is, I've been thinking about this lately, and I actually think it's useful to think about it as two different concepts. There's problem solving, and then there's actually problem defining, which I think is one of those more ethereal skills we don't think about. You kind of learn just by running into lots of problems, and that's one of the fundamental differences that you notice between a developer who's worked in a production environment and a developer who has gone through tutorials and learned some of the fundamental information, but they don't really understand, how do I actually take those tools and then apply it to real problems? And so one of the things I'm hoping that students will come out with is the ability not only to be handed a problem and then solve it, but also the ability to define their problem, break it up into parts, and even make choices. Like, sometimes, so to go into the exercises, I have this one exercise that I'm a huge nerd, so there's going to be lots of references to Dungeons and Dragons, Pokemon, Inspector Gadget. There's all sorts of Lord of the Rings. So there's lots of stuff like that in there. And one of the exercises is to teach you about protocols. And so whenever I'm building the lessons, I try to start with the exercises first as much as possible, and try to get an understanding, like, what do I want the student to be able to do? And so in this one, they're working with a 2D battle map, and their goal is to build like a tactical RPG game. And they're building out some of the initial functionality, which is just determining, can one character attack another character on that battle map? And so they're working with, list of lists, and they're going to have multiple different characters, and different characters will have different attack patterns. So for example, there's a barbarian. The barbarian can attack in kind of a square. There's a wizard who's, casting magic, and so they can attack in a straight line in any direction. And you're given the coordinate of an enemy, and you need to determine, can the barbarian attack that enemy? Can the wizard attack that enemy? And it's supposed to, now, however the students solve that is however they solve it. I'm not trying to enforce that they solve it the way that I want them to, even though it's an exercise specifically designed with protocols in mind, where they would essentially create a character protocol or some sort of like a can attack protocol, whatever the name is. And they would have a character module that would be given a character struct, like a wizard or barbarian, and then the coordinate of the enemy. And so most likely, the most straightforward way to solve it, given the reading material that they just had, is to make a protocol, define an implementation for wizard and barbarian, and then write in the logic for that. The fun part of this is having people as part of a cohort, especially early on where people's skill levels are going to be all over the place, is you'll sometimes find that people solve it in different ways. Like take rock, paper, scissors, for example. The first one, you only have operators, so there's not too many ways to go about it. But if you are coming from a different background and you already know some Elixir, you might already know about functions, you might already know about some control flow. Some students, when I say, all right, like now that we've done that exercise, what are some of the solutions? That'll be this moment to have a dialogue about, oh, hey, we haven't covered this tool that the student used. What is that? What do we think it is? And get the student to also explain it. So big believer in collaborative learning as well as the power of teaching to learn. That's how I learn. So hopefully it's useful for other people as well. So getting the student kind of talk through their answer. And I think I full monologued there, so I'll let you jump in, but I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think Brian wants to jump in.
Hello. Yeah, I got a question. You said that one of the examples regarding Inspector Gadget. And so where do Inspector Gadget's helicopter blades come from? Because they seem to come out of his hat, but they're about like 3-foot solid steel blades. And there's at least 2 of them. So they coming up through his head, like they got to be coming through his body, right? Have you given any thought to this? I think about this like whenever I think about Inspector Gadget.
Like rollers and hinges?
But what is he? He's not a human. Is he a cyborg?
Isn't there a whole origin story? I can't remember Inspector Gadget's origin story, but I thought he was a person and then got modified.
No, they just kind of, from what I recall, they just kind of jump into it. Like they don't get, they kind of like the opening sequence kind of gives you the basic idea. You have, was it Dr. Claw, Professor Claw? You know, he's the bad guy, obviously, because they only show his fist and they show his cat. And then they show Inspector Gadget like whizzing around on his helicopter head and, go Gadget arms. But the whole, whenever I watched Inspector Gadget as a kid, whenever his helicopter blades would pop out of his head, my first thought always went to, where are those coming from? I've never seen a satisfactory answer.
This is the kind of thing where like the people who made the show didn't think about it at all, right? But then like
probably on
the
all
internet
sorts of substances.
There's probably a Inspector Gadget wiki out there where like super fans are like, no, in episode 3, in the shadows, you can see this thing. And that's why we all know that the origin story.
Hey man, I got this idea. There's this guy.
There is an origin story.
There is an origin. Okay, what's the origin story?
All right, I just pasted in the chat.
So
Inspector Gadget's backstory is just as ridiculous and tragic as you would think. Another important aspect of
was he rebuilt?
It never came up during the show's original run was how or why he became a half man, half machine. But in an official 1991 trading card answered those questions. Inspector Gadget was an ordinary police officer, in quotes, named John Brown, who fell down a flight of stairs after slipping on a banana peel. When he awoke from an operation, he had more than 13,000 crime-fighting gadgets attached to his body.
Okay, so first of all, like, how big was the staircase that he fell down? I mean, that must have been crazy. And I don't want to make light of real accidents like that, but the Inspector Gadget idea, and then 13,000 gadgets. So we have not even cracked the nut on what Inspector Gadget is, like his potential.
He's really a TARDIS in human form. So bigger on the inside, it's limitless.
Yeah.
Wow. So
That's my contribution to the
How's that-
roundtable.
How's that for Brian? Yeah, Brian stop in and
Right.
derail the whole conversation. And take
I have to
off.
go into
Brian,
another meeting.
Brian
now.
Cardarella, Brian
You-
Cardarella, founder and CEO of DockYard. Thank you for for bringing in that topic.
We were going to wait for you to do an
You know,
official
it's
introduction.
it's either here or Twitter. So pick your poison.
Oh man, can we get this back on the rails? I'm not sure if we can. What do you think? So actually, Brian, I did have a question for you. I was going to ask you at the beginning. So as far as like this whole program of doing a developer academy that we're trying to put together, what Brooklyn talked about how we would measure success for students. What's success
Yeah.
for DockYard with this?
Success for DockYard is so the advantage that we have over other companies that are selling education services is that they are effectively a for-profit model, and so they are incentivized to push statistics that really claim their the conversion rate or the graduation rate and so on, grow the cohorts, and it's more kind of like data in, data out type model. We're incentivized because DockYard is a consultancy. Our primary revenue is tied directly to our consulting services, and our consulting services are technologically tied to Elixir. And so what we can do as a company to grow the adoption and make it easier for companies to say yes to Elixir as a solution ultimately benefits DockYard in the long run. We have to believe that DockYard's position is one that we're going to be under consideration for most Elixir contracts. I would like to think that's the case. I have no idea what the raw number is, but I have a good sense that DockYard is well thought of in the Elixir community. And I would like to think that most companies looking to do work in Elixir, DockYard's in the mix somewhere. And so if we can make it easier for companies to say, yes, we should adopt Elixir. And one of the things that makes it difficult for companies to adopt Elixir is the issue around how can we build a team around this technology. This has been a topic of conversation for several years now. And so this is why we want to do what we can as a company to create new Elixir engineers. If we're adding to the supply of Elixir engineers that are out there, then we're doing a service to DockYard eventually at some point in the future, as well as just the general ecosystem. You have to think that DockYard has let's say we get on average 25% of the companies looking to do work in Elixir email DockYard looking to work with us. Let's just say that's the number. No idea what it actually is. And there's only about 100 companies per year looking to do work in Elixir. If we can increase the number of companies per year, and that's going to result in a decrease in our percentage just because there'll be more players and more consultancies that get into a more active market. But our raw numbers will go up, right? We will kind of like rise with the tide, so to speak. And so this is why not only is DockYard incentivized to put together a program to create new Elixir engineers. And I missed most of the conversation, so I don't know, Brooklyn, if you had brought this up already, but we plan on releasing all of the education content, open sourcing it. I believe after the first or second cohort, after we've gone through it, verified that this is working, and we've worked out some of the kinks, we then go and just give it away. It will be under a license, and so we're going to disallow the use of it for commercial purposes, meaning that you can't go out and create your own code school around the content that DockYard's creating. But if you wanted to run your own education program internally within your company, or if you wanted to, if you were a consultancy and you're looking to add training and such, that is perfectly acceptable to use our education content But you can't go and start like your own dedicated Elixir school and just basically get all that stuff for free. And so we at most we plan on running 3 cohorts per year with an average of 10 10 applicants per cohort. So let's say we have which won't happen, but let's say we had 100% graduation rate. That means at most we're only creating, DockYard as a company can only create 30 new Elixir engineers per year, which sounds like a decent number. But with kind of the trajectory that Elixir's on at the moment, I don't think it's going to be adequate. And so we have a good reason for giving out this content for others to use, because that's the best way to scale up creating new Elixir engineers. I have no interest in creating a educational company. What I do want to do is have education services so that we can be part of the solution, but have it kind of run in a break-even type model. So yeah, if you want to take the program, and there'll be benefits to coming through DockYard's version of the program as opposed to others if anyone else uses the education material. But we're not looking to make this like $1 million revenue stream or something for DockYard. I mean, I think that the math on it right now is, I think it's like $300,000. So if we're looking, these numbers aren't final, but let's just say the number, like it was 10,000 per head. And so if we're producing 30 engineers per year, that's $300,000. That's revenue. That's pre-tax. That's pre-overhead. All that stuff. So that as a business, it's not a very profitable business, but it allows us to cover our costs. And we'll probably have to add another someone to help out Brooklyn at some point, whether it's the conducting of the classes. I think that the ratio of 1 to 10 teacher to student ratio is probably not ideal. We probably want to have more of a like 1 to 5. But that $300,000 should allow us to cover the costs and benefits and all the overhead of two trainers, 2 instructors on it. Beyond that, I don't know if Brooklyn shared this idea, but I really think that it would be great. Whether Brooklyn implements this or someone else from the DockYard implements it, we give it to Brooklyn. But Brooklyn has his pre-existing kind of Elixir Newbie website and content already out there, and I think the Elixir community would greatly benefit from a job board that was focused entirely on entry-level Elixir positions. So it's free to post. Your post is good for 30 days, but it subject to review, right? And so what we don't want is what we see sometimes in the Elixir Slack channel, where someone posts for one little position and they're like, oh yeah, we're also like 20 other positions are open too. No. This is going to be entirely dedicated towards, or I think it should be entirely dedicated towards only entry level. If your company, because that like we're such a senior heavy technology right now, that that alone is part of the supply demand problem. And the reason why it's so expensive to run an Elixir team, because even if you want to kind of average out your costs across different levels of experience, it's probably more likely that you're going to find a high mid to a senior level talent than a apprentice level talent right now in Elixir. So what can we do to try to increase the signal of that out there, and having a place that is highly visible for companies to go and advertise? First of all, I think that we should be advertising and really identifying and amplifying the companies that are willing to take on entry level Elixir positions. So I like that idea, but also a place that we can direct. I see quite frequently. So there's a channel in Slack, the Elixir Slack, called Jobs Chat. And so the Jobs channel is dedicated just for people that are posting jobs. Jobs Chat is more for people that are seeking positions. And I see maybe once or twice a week a few messages in there from people saying, hey, I'm currently doing technology X, right? But I've been playing with Elixir for 6 months, or I really like it, and I want to start doing it. Where do I go? Most of the time, it's crickets. There's so many companies out there that are only wanting to hire senior. That I think that we need. If DockYard has influence in the community, and I like to think that we do, if we can kind of influence the conversation a bit and course correct companies towards, getting them entry-level positions, providing them material on how to skill up their engineers. Ultimately, in the long run, again, this helps Elixir's longevity as a. Sorry, my dog is like trying to get in my lap. Elixir's longevity as a technology solution that companies would want to adopt, and this translates down the line to there being more potential companies that may come back to DockYard and say, "Hey, we need your services." So it's a very long play. And it's not one that a lot of companies can really invest in because the return on it is so nebulous. And it's really kind of like a multi-year type play as well. Like we won't see returns on this for maybe at least 2 or 3 years, if that, I would imagine. But let's say we get even one contract from it, just one contract within a 2 or 3 year period, kind of pays for itself. Right, kind of pays for the entire effort of going in and doing this. So I'm willing to bet some money on this. I like Brooklyn's enthusiasm around this. I'm really glad that we had a few false starts with other potential candidates in this on this effort, and I think Brooklyn got on my radar from. Might have been Smart Logics, the Elixir Wizard podcast. I think that's the one, Brooklyn, you were on, or maybe you was thinking Elixir. I forget which.
No, you have it right.
Which one you were on. And I mean, it may have been like a day or two after that was released. I just pinged Brooklyn on Slack, and it was really nice to see how aligned he and I were on kind of just these initiatives and concepts. Like I think that. Unless Brooklyn's just yesing me to death. Like he seems to be very enthusiastic and very on board with most of the ideas that I proposed, and so it's been a very easygoing working relationship. So I'm really glad that we found each other, but also I'm really impressed with the progress that's been made thus far. Because doing content is not easy. I think it's always one thing. I think a lot of people are in everyone's head. Everyone's always better than they are when they put it to paper sometimes, because it's difficult, kind of actualizing and really articulating your thoughts on things. And so content production is not easy by any stretch.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for the kind words. And yeah, I remember that our first conversation for me was a lot of fun. And I was actually, I don't know if I've already given you this story, but I was already thinking about, man, Elixir really needs a boot camp. I'm positioned perfectly to do that because that's been my focus, is Elixir Newbie, is helping new developers learn. And that's something that when I came into the community, I felt was really lacking. As you said, Elixir is very top heavy. There's a lot of senior and intermediate talent. Those are the problems that people are focusing on. And so there just wasn't a lot of resources surrounding like, hey, if you're a complete beginner or you are new to Elixir, there just wasn't a lot for you. And so I was brainstorming, well, how do I start some sort of program while working a full-time job, while also doing the podcast, while also handling content creation and all of the side things in there, also sleep, I guess. How do I add on to that, creating a boot camp or a program or a course or something that could help people? So when you reached out and said, hey, do you want to have the ability to do that full time, and the resources of DockYard and all of these wonderful people to collaborate with, it was like, yes, yes, absolutely, I want to do that. That is, I can't think of something I want to do more. So I'm extremely excited about it.
That's awesome. So
Hey, I know I just popped it in for a second, but I actually have to jump off because I have to go to 3:30. So
all right.
Goodbye.
All right. Thanks, Brian. So in terms of the content creation that you're doing right now in Brooklyn, what are you feeling good about so far, and what do you feel like what are the big challenges right now in putting together the rest of the material?
So what I'm feeling good about, I'm really happy with the quality that's coming out. I'm really happy with the power that Livebook has given me, the ability to make like these, use this tool called Mermaid to generate graphs, and I can make those in literal seconds as opposed to like going to some software, building it, importing it. So the power of Livebook and being able to write like code and animations and actually execute the code, and that has been phenomenal. So quality-wise, I'm really happy with what's the one of the struggles for me that I think has been alleviated was for the first few weeks I was working in a bit of a what's the term? Not echo chamber, but I was kind of working in isolation. I had some people external to DockYard look at it, but I hadn't had a lot of internal review. So I was feeling a lot of anxiety about like, have I made enough? Is this the right direction? But having more people look at it, I think has made me feel like, okay, yeah, it's going in the right direction. There's enough there. And then one of the things I'm definitely struggling with right now is I'm very inspired by Khan Academy, Salman Khan, as an educator. And one of the things that he talks about is what you want your variable to be is not the material covered. You want the variable to be time, but most programs do it the opposite, where the variable is how much material you're going to cover. Like you go through a typical university course or even high school, and you'll go through some fundamental concepts, and maybe you fail a test, and that test will never be covered again. That's the grade you're going to get for that test for the rest of the year. That's how good you are at algebra, right? It's like, that's ridiculous. And so figuring out, well, how do I balance my desire to let people go at their own pace? You know, some people are going to be absolute race cars and they're just going to, you know, drive through it, and that's awesome. Some people are going to need to take more time with it. So how do I give people that freedom and flexibility within a particular time constraint? And knowing exactly how long something is going to take, it's tough, because when you already know the answer, you're like, oh, okay, I think this is maybe an hour-long exercise. It might be double that, or it might be 5 minutes, because knowing the answer, it's 5 minutes. But of course, knowing the answer is 5 minutes, right? So figuring out the actual amount of time things are going to take to complete, I think that's what I'm currently challenged by. And I need more people to go through it to give that feedback.
Well, speaking of that, and we need to wrap up here pretty soon because I think we've been at this about an hour, but
Let's just do 2 episodes.
we'll definitely do a follow-up on this. I mean, this is an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
But what's sort of the timeline that we're looking at for trying to get the first cohort? Are we at the point where we would say, like, should people contact us, or is it too early for that? Do you need like early test drivers?
Yeah, so should people contact us? Yes. I just don't know exactly what for yet. Let me clarify that, because that doesn't sound quite right. I definitely need people to beta test the content, and people who want to drive through it. 100%. I absolutely. Are we ready to collect a list of future students? That'd be more Brian's domain. We're hoping to, I believe, start going through, I want to say June, July is our current target for when we want things to be ready for students to be able to go through, to be doing kind of a beta curriculum or cohort 1. Brian will be better at answering these types of questions. Right now, I'm kind of day to day, just going, okay, how do I make as much as possible today, in the hopes that I do hit those goals. But yeah, definitely. I love it when people reach out to me. I'm always available. So if people want to reach out directly to DockYard, that's awesome. If people are curious and they want to DM me, I'm on the Elixir Slack, as well as I'm at Brooklin J. Myers on Twitter. People do reach out, and I'm having some people go through the curriculum now. So yeah, definitely. I just don't know when we're ready for actual students. That's Brian's domain.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, we are excited to see where this thing goes, and I love the work you're doing on it so far. Anybody else have anything they want to jump in with before we wrap this up? Cool. Well, if you have enjoyed watching this show or listening to this show, as the case may be, please write a review, translate it into Morse code, and use it to add a bike lane to the nearest road. Thank you very much for being with us on the podcast.
Thank you, Nathan.